Hello and welcome to the WPAOG podcast. This episode features an interview with Sean Mullin, award-winning filmmaker and West Point grad, class of 1997. Sean's feature film debut as a writer and director, Amira and Sam, won numerous film festivals and was distributed theatrically. Following that, Sean co-wrote and co-produced Semper Fi and wrote and directed Kings of Beer. Now he's happy to announce the release of It Ain't Over, Sean's feature-length documentary about baseball legend and American icon Yogi Berra. Prior to his filmmaking career, Sean served in the military. He was stationed in Germany as an Army officer, but finished his time as a captain in the New York Army National Guard, where he was a first responder on September 11, 2001. For several months, he spent his days working as the officer in charge of the soldiers stationed at Ground Zero, and his nights performing stand-up comedy. In this episode, Sean talks about his time serving in the National Guard, how he made the transition from Army officer to Hollywood director, and the release of his first independent feature-length documentary, It Ain't Over. Now, please enjoy this interview between Sean Mullin, West Point class of 1997, and your host, Jamie Enos.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for coming on the show today. I'm excited for today's show because I just love profiling West Point grads and showcasing the depth of experiences that can result from coming to the academy. So thanks for being here.
Oh my goodness. Thanks for having me. This is really wonderful.
Let's get started. Can you talk about your decision just to attend West Point?
Yeah, I don't come from a military family. Really, I had spent my first 9 years in Indiana and then my second 9 in Boca Raton, Florida. And so I played a lot of sports, big family, 6 kids. And so, my parents didn't save up anything for college. My dad was an entrepreneur, so we either had money or we did not have money. So he's a bit of a gambler with life in a lot of ways. So yeah, I got recruited to play football at West Point. I got recruited to play tight end. And when they reached out to me, I thought that sounded interesting. And I don't know, my mom always had a really strong kind of patriotic streak through her. She used to read me Abraham Lincoln's letters, at night before bed and stuff. And she was always very much, into the idea of America, really, to put it broadly. So, thought it was a good fit. And then, decided to come up for a visit. And I visited and it sounded like a really great challenge and decided to go ahead and go for it. And then when I got up to West Point, I ended up not playing football. I ended up switching over and playing rugby. And rugby kind of saved my life, my cadet life at least. And I guess maybe the rest of it,
Yeah. So what kind of cadet were you? Did you walk a lot of hours?
I walked 69 hours, which was like, just under 100. I was not a century man, but yeah, I walked 5 grad week. I remember that. I remember I was at 64 and then I got 5 more grad week because I didn't have something was wrong with one of my uniforms, I think. So I think I was a decent cadet, I don't know. I mean, I'll leave that to others. I mean, my grades were good. I had good grades. I was kind of a bit of a joker. I had kind of done comedy in high school. I had kind of done some sketches. I was the MC for all of our high school events and stuff like that and, did all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I fit the typical mold maybe of what people thought a cadet should be. But I had, always had, I thought, good leadership skills from sports and everything like that and was able to kind of sort of lead my team and get people excited. And, I think I had a little bit of maybe charisma or something, whatever that entails. And so I was able to, I think I was able to fit in some ways and maybe other ways, maybe not quite as much. But again, I think, being able to hook into that rugby team the first semester, plebe year, and I spent all 8 semesters in blood, sweat, and tears on the Army rugby pitch. And so I think that really informed most of my time at the academy.
Yeah, that's for sure, right? You get the leadership, you've got the time management skills, right? And then I've heard that you also have had an investment skill, right? So how did you use your Cal loan again? What's that story? Is that a little...
Well, yeah. So again, having a father that didn't really, understand money and again, was up and down with his finances, his whole life. You get this Cal loan junior year is a $17,000 loan. And I mean, I was like 17,000. That was more money than I'd ever could imagine having $17,000. And so I had already had about, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 grand racked up in a few different credit cards. I took that 17 grand, I cleaned up my credit cards, which was the first priority. Then I bought a really just, kind of crappy Buick Century off an old woman down in Boca Raton for, 5 or 6 grand maybe. And then I bought a video camera and I started videotaping my buddies telling ridiculous stories. And I just was always a storyteller at heart. It's something I always loved to do. I never thought I could do it for a living, but I'm fortunate to be there now. But yeah, so I think that was like kind of the beginning of my journey as a storyteller.
Sure. And what was your major here at West Point?
I was a law major. Yeah, law. It was law FOS. It wasn't a major. It was law field of study. So I don't know if the difference, but yeah, law. And then when I was with law, I wanted, again, typical just of my father, just being, this, again, I was raised with this like toxic optimism. Honestly, it's just like ridiculous. So when I was a law major, I was like, oh, what do you want to do for your AID? And I was like, well, I want to intern at the Supreme Court. They're like, well, we don't do that here. Like, I was like, I called the Supreme Court and I said, hey, would you take an intern from West Point? They were like, yeah, maybe, sure. Can you fax us? I mean, I had to fax over a letter. So I faxed over a request and they accepted it. And I was the first cadet to intern at the Supreme Court. And they still do that, I think, or at least they did it for a long time. I don't know if it's still going on. But so yeah, I just kind of always carved my own path in a way,
Yeah, that's incredible. Wow. Oh my goodness. So you graduate West Point. Congratulations as a rugby player.
Thank you.
And you have your investment in your VHS camcorder or what have you. You commission field artillery and you end up in Germany. And so you have any inspiring stories from that tour that you can share?
I mean, I have a lot of stories. I don't know how you define some of them. I had a really wonderful, it was late 90s. So it was 97, 98, 99 in Germany. As a field artillery officer, a fire support officer for a mechanized infantry unit in Schweinfurt, Germany. Had a really great time. I ended up playing a lot of rugby. For a little bit of time, I co-captained the Armed Forces Europe rugby team for a couple matches. I took them to Amsterdam for a tournament. So I played a lot of rugby and kind of did a lot of training. The Balkans were kind of winding down around then. This was obviously before everything heated up with September 11th. So I actually ended up transferring in 99. They offered active duty officers the opportunity to transfer from active duty to the National Guard. And so I put my name in the hat for that. And I got accepted to the New York Army National Guard in Manhattan. There's a big armory on the Upper East Side of Manhattan on 68th and Park Avenue. And so I became the plans officer. All of a sudden, I became a logistics kind of officer, and I became the plans officer for Manhattan, which was 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year. So that was a real shift for me to kind of sort of go from going full-time active Army to National Guard in New York was like a real, gear shift. I ran the qualification range. I was a marksman, marksman status or whatever from active duty. And so I remember running the qualification ranges out of Fort Dix in New Jersey and doing stuff like that on the weekends. But then I started like bartending. I started writing really bad screenplays. I started doing stand-up comedy. I did some improv theater. There's an improv theater in New York called the Upright Citizens Brigade that opened in 99. And so I started doing improv and stand-up and started living more of a creative life. And then September 11th happened and I was the plans officer for Manhattan. So, we went from needing no plans in Manhattan to needing a lot of plans. And so, I spent those first 2 weeks. When I was in my uniform before noon on the 11th, I got my wife time, got her safe, got her dropped off at a friend's house. We each pulled like $400 in cash out of an ATM. I remember I got in my uniform and I went into the Army. I was the first officer to make it in the Army. I was the only officer that lived in Manhattan. Most of the other officers lived out in Long Island or upstate. So got to my armory and then ended up going downtown. Those next 2 weeks were really intense. The first 2 weeks after the attacks. And so I was, helping cordon off the area. And my commanding officer was kind of the commander of the troops down there. And then eventually when we went from we had about 250 National Guardsmen to like about 25, when it shrunk down, they put me in charge and they ended up making me the officer in charge of the soldiers at Ground Zero. And I ended up retaining that position until August of 2002. So almost 9 months after I took kind of command in January. So yeah, it was an interesting experience, but I was still doing stand-up comedy at night and improv theater at night. And then I would spend 12 hours a day at Ground Zero and then go, try to be creative at night and tried to stay married and tried to do all that type stuff. And it was a difficult time, but I think something that, my time at West Point prepared me for and actually my time on the rugby pitch as well,
Yeah, I would think that that's quite the shift going from Ground Zero to stand-up comedy and kind of making that transition. But perhaps it was also an outlet at the time for you because the intensity of what was going on during the day.
Absolutely. No, it was absolutely an outlet. It was, completely different world, completely different sets of people, completely different groups of friends. But it was really helpful to me, I think, to kind of sort of try to keep some sort of sense of humor. It was anybody who was in New York for those first like 6 months after the attacks, it was a dark kind of time and a dark place. But it was also like this really strangely like hopeful, everybody, just strangers. I remember prior to September 11th, I would take the bus for my drill weekend. So my unit was on the east side, so I lived on the Upper West Side. So I would wear my uniform and I would take the M79 bus through Central Park. And I remember before September 11th, if I was in my uniform, the bus drivers always allowed me to ride for free because I was in my, my BDUs, like my uniform. And I remember a couple times I got looks, I got looks on one time. One woman said something. She's like, "Oh, that's not right. He's riding for free," And so I paid and everything, whatever. And I always remember that story because after September 11th, anytime I wore my uniform in Manhattan, I was, people were buying me drinks and, buying me meals and patting me on the back and just hugging me out of the blue. And I don't know, that kind of shift in perception of people in uniform. I think before and after September 11th was extremely pronounced for me, and something that has always stuck with me. It ended up bleeding into my first feature film, Amira and Sam, which is a love story about an Army veteran who falls in love with an Iraqi refugee in New York. And some of those ambivalent feelings about the military and stuff, I kind of bled into that script and that story. So to jump ahead in the story, while I was at Ground Zero, I got accepted, spring of '02, I got accepted to Columbia's MFA program for film directing. And that was like a real dream of mine. And I just took the leap and I went for it. And so I resigned from the military in August of '02, and it was the last day I shaved, actually. The beard ever since. And I went to film school, and I was at Columbia from '02 to '05, getting my master's in film directing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, we have to look for those bright spots, like you said, the opportunistic points where we had the tragedy that can bring everybody together at the same time. You applied for film school for your MFA. What made you decide to do that? Where was that shift, or where was that motivation to go to film school?
I mean, I think it was probably rooted in the same urge for me to use my Cal loan to buy a video camera. It was just this urge to tell stories. And in high school, I mean, to back it up even further, like I said, I did stand up and sketch comedy in high school, but I wrote some short stories in my high school magazine and stuff. So I was always a storyteller. I think it just became more and more pronounced. It was like kind of coming out, as if I was like coming out of, this shell or whatever. And I just said, hey, if I'm going to take a stab, especially spending all that time down at Ground Zero and realizing life is so, so fragile, and life can really just vanish in an instant, I mean, some of the stuff we had to do that, we had to turn the Burger King into a morgue. My unit was in charge of escorting the body parts from one side of the pit to the other side. And, so you're dealing with that stuff on a daily basis, at least for the first few weeks. And, you start looking at life, you're like, well, this could be a short trip, so why not do what you love? And I always loved telling stories. And so I took the big leap of faith.
Well, WPAOG profiled you in the West Point magazine back the winter issue in 2016. And listeners can find that on our website at WPAOG.org. At the time, the author, Keith Hamill, he referenced an Orson Welles quote, and that goes, "A writer needs a pen, an artist needs a brush, but a filmmaker needs an army." You've gone to West Point, you graduated as in law studies, a law major, you commissioned as an Army officer, you've had boots on the ground experience. And I know you're not bashing the amazing experience that you've had at Columbia, but you've been quoted as saying that West Point is the best film school. So how do you feel that West Point actually prepared you for Hollywood and directing and writing and producing the films and everything that you're all wrapped up in right now?
Well, it was definitely a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, response when I said West Point's the best film school in the country, because they also obviously don't have a film program. But, it's funny, after this podcast today, I'm actually going to my office here in LA, and I have 3 cadets who are in LA right now, sponsored by the English and Philosophy Department. They are out here for 2 weeks on an AIAD that I helped set up with Captain Rodriguez, who's really wonderful. And they are shooting a short film out here in LA for 2 weeks. And they're going to go back and edit it. And we're going to have a short film for their summer academic internship. And so that's super exciting. So for me, the qualities, I get this a lot of times, like, oh, you went to West Point, you're a director. Those couldn't be more different. I go, honestly, it couldn't be a better fit in a lot of ways. I mean, yes, you need the creative side, right? And I was very fortunate, a very creative father, and a very creative mother. My mother was in theater and a very super creative writer, and all these things that she's done in her life that have been really, truly incredible. So I had a very creative upbringing, but the structure from West Point and the leadership, when you're on set and you've got 80 people looking at you and you're supposed to shoot this massive scene, and the rain comes in unexpectedly, and you've got to move, you've got to motivate, you've got to get people inside, you've got to switch things around, you've got to go on the fly, you got to manage egos. I mean, it is so similar to being a commander of a unit that I think those skills are really extremely transferable to the film business. And I've found myself to be extremely fortunate to have had those at West Point. And so that's why I try to flip the perception a little bit anytime someone asks me that question.
Like you mentioned, you've welcomed some West Point cadets out there this summer out in California for an AID. For anybody listening, the AIDs are academic individual advanced development opportunities that the Academy offers. And for those that may not know, the AIDs are comparable to internships that cadets must complete. They either complete a military, a physical, or an academic IAD in order to graduate. So it sounds like an amazing opportunity to coach and just connect with the cadets while they're out there and help guide them.
Yeah, I'm teaching them a directing class this afternoon. We're doing a script read of their script, and they go into production on Monday. So it's a 4-day shoot, and then they're going to go back to West Point. So they're super excited. They're loving it already. So it's really great.
That's great. Yeah. And it's an incredible opportunity. And I'd be totally remiss if I didn't mention that most of those AIDs and opportunities outside the classroom like that are made possible by donors supporting the margin of excellence. So to any of our donors listening, thank you so much for your support. It really does impact the cadets in a positive light. Congratulations on your recent work where you directed and wrote It Ain't Over, which is a documentary on Yogi Berra. The film has an impressive list of guest appearances that help tell the story of Yogi's incredible baseball career with the New York Yankees. How'd you get involved with that project?
There's a father-son duo, Peter and Mike Sobolov, who helped finance Amira and Sam, my first scripted film, my scripted feature film from 2015. And they put some money into that. I mean, I made that movie for nothing. I made my first film for $300,000, which is really no money to make a feature film. But it was my first movie, and you have to make your first one for not much because people don't know who you are. People don't know if you can actually tell a story. So that's kind of how it works. So they put a chunk of money into that first film. They loved how it turned out. They were really, really happy. And so, they approached me, they called me and said, hey, we have got a connection to the Berra family. They had just seen, this was 2018. This is how long these things take. It's 23 now, right? So 2018, summer, I got a phone call and they had just seen that Mr. Rogers documentary and said, hey, there's this Mr. Rogers documentary. We have a connection to the Berra family. We feel like there could be a similar documentary. Would you be interested in directing it? And so I got on board and, started meeting the family, met the three sons, and then Yogi's oldest granddaughter, Lindsay, met her, and she's like this force of nature. And I was like, wow, she's an incredible person. And I decided I kind of, about a third of the way through it, doing interviews, I decided to make her the narrator of the film, which I think worked out really well. And yeah, we premiered it at the Tribeca Film Festival. We went out, raised the money all independently. It's not a studio film at all. It's an independent film. So went out, raised the money independently and premiered at Tribeca, had a sold out screening. We had everybody. We had, Joe Torre was there, Bob Costas. We had a really great premiere and sold it to Sony Pictures Classics, which is a great distributor. And they've been having it in theaters. It opened in theaters in May, and it's still in theaters. And it's actually now available also on video on demand too. So like Amazon and all that stuff, you can purchase it. So it's been an incredible ride, a really incredible ride. And the reviews have been through the roof. It's just been beyond my wildest expectations.
Yeah, it has. All right. I have to admit, I have this family lore story about Yogi Berra. My family is originally from Clifton, New Jersey, and my grandfather used to bowl regularly at Berra Lanes right there. And he would tell all the time how Yogi would entertain all the littles, like after the business, and even after the business was like sold and turned over and stuff, he would come in and just entertain while all the grown-ups were bowling. And so I have no memory of this, and I don't even know if it's, fact or fiction. That's the story. But I personally do think it's why I occasionally make these strange analogies. And that's the story I was brought up with, to make maybe excuses for why my brain is a little bit programmed in that way. But, oh well. But you've crafted an interesting documentary there. It's great work. I laughed. I was angry. I was maybe even a little watery-eyed at points during the storytelling. But do you yourself have a favorite Yogiism you want to share?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I mean, I like the ones that are just kind of a bit philosophical, or, he was driving his family one time and his wife was like, hey, we're lost. He said, yeah, we're lost, but we're making great time. And so I always like that one. He also talked about his favorite restaurant in St. Louis. He said, nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded, which is another great one. So yeah, I mean, I like the ones that really pop with some sort of, kind of philosophical kind of zing. So there's so many good ones. It's really incredible. I had read somewhere he's the second most quoted American outside Mark Twain, but I couldn't factually verify that. So that's not in the doc. But yeah, but if you see the documentary, you'll see we get into the, the ones that are true, the ones that are fake, and how kind of his myth, I mean, that's a big part of the documentary, is how his kind of myth overtook his, accomplishments on the diamond.
All right. So Amira and Sam 2014 came out, available on Amazon Prime. And that film basically looks at immigration and veteran assimilation. Do you want to explain that a little bit more and tell us where your thoughts were with that film?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I was a time, I didn't go overseas. I didn't go over to Iraq or Afghanistan. And a lot of my friends did. And I lost a couple of friends. And the friends who came back are just some of my closest people in my life. Some of the people I respect the most in my life and really, truly, deeply love on a deep level. And so, I wanted to tell a story about a veteran who comes home who doesn't really have PTSD, but kind of the country had PTSD after this war. And so kind of flipping that a little bit and kind of looking at a veteran who just really wants a fair shake when he comes home, and comes home to a country he kind of doesn't really recognize in a lot of ways. And just the idea that both veterans and, refugees or immigrants in this country, were being marginalized, in different ways, and when I feel like those are kind of the core of who we are as Americans. And so I kind of wanted to tell this kind of cross-cultural love story about an Army veteran and an Iraqi refugee. I had a lot of friends who were helping their interpreters try to get out of the Middle East. And so that was kind of the seed for the idea of this character who played by Martin Starr, who's like from Freaks and Geeks, and he's Silicon Valley, and now he's on this Tulsa King show on Paramount Plus. So he's a great actor, and he, his character in the film helps get his interpreter out, and then his interpreter then helps get his niece out. The interpreter gets his niece out, and then the interpreter's niece has a relationship with Martin's character, Sam. And so kind of it goes from there. But I tried to explore a bunch of issues. I mean, again, this is like the type of thing where it was my first feature film. So I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to make another film. So I crammed in a lot of stuff. I crammed in, if you watch the film, you can see that, it's definitely set in the post 9/11 era, 2007, 2008, right around the time of the banking issues with everything. Yeah, I definitely drew on my time, I think, living in New York and being down at Ground Zero and being around a lot of the Wall Street guys and kind of sort of navigating that world in an interesting way. I'd been offered some jobs by some Wall Street guys that I didn't take. And I kind of schmoozed and mingled with them a lot and learned a little bit about that world. So I jammed a lot into the film, jammed a lot into 90-something minutes, but I'm really proud of how it turned out. And it got me started. It got me over the hump. We won 10 film festivals. We got bought by Alamo Drafthouse, the chain of theaters, the Drafthouse Films. They put us in their theaters. I got signed at UTA, a big talent agency. I've been with them ever since. So I've had agents since then, which is a big deal in LA to have an agent to actually represent you and get you work. So yeah, it was a real win ultimately for me, but it was a difficult thing to do, to pull off, to tell that story. But I'm really proud of that film.
Do you find that there's a long gray line connection out there when you're in the industry that you've been able to work with, or?
I'm making a documentary right now about the West Point rugby team. So again, rugby was so important to me that I've been trying to tell the story of Army rugby for 25 years. And I finally got my in. I teamed up with Brian Anthony, who was the captain of the 01 rugby team, and just one of the greatest people you ever really want to meet, and one of my closest friends. He's a very successful television writer out here in Hollywood. So we teamed up, and we are producing, we're kind of co-producing, co-writing, and then I'm directing this documentary about the West Point rugby team. So I've been following the West Point rugby team for a year. I've been embedded with the team, and we got full approval. It's been a tough ride, but we got full approval from the public affairs at West Point. Then we had to go up the chain. We had to go to the Pentagon. We got full approval from DOD. So it's been really great. So that should be coming out hopefully sometime in 2024. So keep your eyes peeled for it. The current working title is Brothers, but who knows if that sticks. We'll see how that goes depending on our distributor. But yeah, the Army rugby team won the national championship in 2022. And so we're kind of following them kind of the season after that. And so it's been great. But no, as far as, out here in Hollywood, there are some older grads that were in the business that I'm not as close with, but Brian Anthony, and then TJ Brady is a 96 grad who I'm also super close with. I mean, TJ and I have had, morning, monthly breakfast, once a month for about 15 years. And so he's a very successful television writer as well. So, between TJ and Brian, those are probably my two closest West Point alumni kind of allies, but there's others as well. And some Navy guys too,
That's great. That's great that everybody can come together and just support each other on projects and help you through it all, because it's the networking, right? So always good. Well, I keep looking at that calendar, and the class of 2027 is coming in this year. So the class that enters West Point in 2023 is your 30-year affiliation class. We at AOG, we don't have a formal 30-year. We have the formal 50-year affiliation class that we like to work with. But knowing that the plebes will be 30 years after you has got to hit home a little bit, right? And so what advice do you have for them?
What advice do I have for them? Oh, goodness. I mean, I don't know. Just, be true to yourself, take an experience. It's only 47 months, but, those 47 months have an outsized kind of impact on the rest of your life. I think I'm a big believer, and this is a big storytelling, this is a big film directing thing. I've been a film professor I taught at USC for 3 years. I teach at AFI now, American Film Institute out here in LA. So I teach a lot of film, I teach a lot of directing, and the two kind of greatest tools for any director are, the greatest tools, but two of the most important tools, I should say, of any director are the ability to compress or elaborate, because I think life is, life's about what you elaborate, what you compress. At the end of the day, when you're on your, not to get too morbid, you're on your deathbed, you're not going to remember your whole life, right? You're going to remember a dozen, 2 dozen moments. That's really what you're going to walk away with. And so I think those 47 months have, at least for me, and I think for most people, but I don't want to speak for everyone, but have an outsized kind of influence on the rest of your life. Those 47 months felt like a much longer time, and so much growth occurs. So if I was going to give any advice to any kind of incoming cadet, I'd say just really, sink into those moments and really make the most of your time there, and, try to stay out of trouble, I guess. That's what I did. But I didn't do that good a job.
Maybe keep the hours under 100.
Yeah, I did. I was proud of that. I mean, listen, I deserved about 2,000 hours, but I got away with under 100. So that was good.
That's really great. Well, thanks, Sean, so much. Thanks so much for coming on today. All the best with It Ain't Over. And we always love when everybody can share their stories. We look forward to following this and keeping up with the rugby distribution and release of that movie when that film comes out. It's just always interesting to see the different paths that grads can take from West Point, that it's not this script, right? There's a lot of differences that come out at the end of the same experience. I always find that really interesting and something to smile about, but can always note that you stayed connected and that long gray line is there and that you fall back on that a little bit. So we totally look forward to when that next film comes out on Army West Point Rugby's Brotherhood. And we'll talk to you then too. We'd love to have you back on.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful. And, I'm excited to, write out the rest of the year. I've got some other projects coming out as well. So stay tuned for those. And then the Yogi thing. Yeah, they're going to be doing a big awards push at the end of the year for the It Ain't Over. So, I'll be excited to see how far we can ride that. It's been a really wonderful, wonderful time and such a great time talking with you. Thank you for having me. It's, it's so great that you guys do this stuff. I've, been listening to some of these podcasts and it's really, really wonderful. So it's an honor to be here.
Oh, thanks, Sean. We'll talk to you soon. We'll have you back.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.